Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, and I'm trying to present an argument about some inevitabilities, uh, some of which I claim are pretty watertight, like that it is inevitable that the spirit of the gangster uh, will get a disproportionate say in how any creature's civilization that begins to emerge will develop from there. Didn't prove what percentage of how it develops is dictated by the spirit of the gangster. But I claim that only what can survive and spread in a anarchic world where there's a war of all against all, only those options are viable for getting into the future. So the future of civilization is inevitably going to be shaped by what prevails in such an ugly process as a war of all against all. In this video, I'm going to argue for the proposition that if any creature whose culture takes the next step and breaks through into developing a whole new form of life from the one in which it evolved biologically, will eventually, inevitably, get the power to be able to destroy itself. The idea of a civilization destroying itself is something it was in the world that I was born into in 1946. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had just occurred. Pretty soon the Soviets had it too, and then pretty soon we've got the Cold War. And people were facing, could this be the end of humankind? It was a very live issue, and I think it was live in a way that, even though lots of people over the eons have been concerned about, the end of time, the second coming, the apocalypse, all these end of the world fantasies that people have had, I think there's something different about what we were involved with in the age of the superpower confrontation, the two nuclear superpowers. The air raid drills that we huddled with our heads covered, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, where people were wondering whether we were going to all survive this thing. Later in the 80s, talk about nuclear winter, if there was this all-out exchange that people thought might happen between the two nuclear superpowers. So I've had a lot of reason to perceive us in a way that, I don't know how you compare, but from a practical point of view, there's been a lot of reason that other previous generations of humans haven't had to think, which is, are we going to have a war that ends human civilization? And then after the dawn of the nuclear age, there was the dawn of the awareness of our environmental impact. And as that melded into, from various things like polluted rivers and air pollution and chlorofluorocarbons, and we have an international treaty about that, and then visible extinctions. But then gradually there becomes out of the scientific world a very powerful voice, saying that we are headed for a kind of possible catastrophe about the way we're changing the climate, because our human activity is having such a huge impact beyond what pre-industrial societies, beyond what the 19th century industrial societies did, but cumulatively and now at a much greater scale, we are changing the atmosphere so fast in ways that are going to destabilize the Earth's climate, and that's going to have a lot of catastrophic effects, or it might. So we've got this second way of seeing ourselves as having the capacity to destroy ourselves. I mean, I don't know what an all-out nuclear exchange would do exactly to, what would be left, if anything, that's alive. I don't know. I mean, people used to talk about that sort of thing, but I'm not even sure if, the Pentagon knows. If we had that exchange that people were afraid of in 1962, would that have been the end of life on Earth, or just made a huge mess out of everything? And now we got the climate thing, which I don't know quite how catastrophic that might be, but at the very least, we're generating uninhabitable areas. We're going to be generating probably big flows of migration from places where people are dying if they don't leave to places that don't want immigrants, because we've seen that absorbing immigrants at any large scale is something very difficult for even decent societies to achieve without negative political consequences. I don't like to think about that future, but all that is possible. The possibility of self-destruction is something that has become visible. And you could perhaps, people thought that they could see it in World War I, but it's become more visible in our time. And I think there's something inevitable about that. That's what I want to articulate here. Let's start with the concept of culture and what it is. Culture is that which is not laid out in the DNA, but is created by the people and passed along from generation to generation. So to be a cultural animal, you got to do both those things. You got to be able to innovate things that aren't laid down in your instinctual system. That's biological. Cultural is all the stuff that we create. We have biologically, we got a capacity for language and apparently a real orientation to soaking it up when we're very, very little. Now, that's the biology of it, it would appear. The content of the language, that's cultural. So the capacity to innovate, to create something new, plus the capacity to transmit things, means that culture is going to be cumulative. The present is going to create the future by building on what was handed down from the past, adding whatever it adds. Because people are going to keep on innovating. Why wouldn't they? That's what we got. We got this creative intelligence, and things aren't going to be static when you've got that kind of thing going on. And we've got the skill about ways of passing things along, and we've developed more skills about how to do that. But we always had the ability to pass on a language, for example. And now we've got educational systems which pass on, a whole lot more. We pass along technology. The technology in my iPhone is a cumulative composition, a composition of countless previous innovations that people had worked through. It's going to become more and more powerful over time because people are going to choose those innovations that increase their ability to get what they want, to achieve their goals. Culture is going to start out thinner, whatever that is, way, way back, and it'll get progressively thicker. I like the metaphor. I mean, I, there's a whole lot to be said about languages, and maybe, maybe the linguists who say that all the languages are equally complex. I don't believe that, but they know more than I do. But I think about the multi-volume Oxford Dictionary of the English Language. A hunting gathering society is going to have something like that? I can't imagine. It's cumulative, and it can be cumulative in all kinds of ways. And so, as people make their civilization ever more potent in being able to achieve human goals, it's going to get more and more powerful. And one of those goals is how to survive in a world where there's a war of all against all. Weaponry is going to be an area of innovation because creative people whose lives are on the line are going to say, can't we do better than this thing because we're up against people who have got that thing? And so you get, from archery, you get to English crossbow, you get the invention of gunpowder that comes over from China and into Europe. China's fairly unified, so they don't. I think they have more of an empire already that encompasses. So they're not into the same kind of anarchy. But the Europeans are very fragmented at this point, which is like 1,000 years ago or something. And gunpowder is something to use in the war of all against all. And so offense and defense have a whole new relationship. There's going to be innovation in offense. There are going to be innovations in defense, and it just escalates. The arms race that we had in the Cold War was sort of a very dramatic and global and especially dangerous version of the arms race that has been going on through the history of civilization. People with bronze swords were a big deal at one point. And then they encountered the people who had innovated the iron swords. So it goes. The people with the gunships, and when the Europeans decided they wanted to build empires of a global nature, subjugating various agricultural societies as their colonies, they had means, technological and administrative, of conquering peoples. They had more power. The Roman Empire was mighty, but if the Romans had gone up against the 19th century military of the Great Britain, it would not have gone well for the Romans. There's an escalation that occurs in the area of weaponry because necessity is the mother of invention, as has been said. And when people are in an anarchic intersocietal system where you need to prevail or at least survive in a war of all against all, there's a lot of motivation. There's a lot of necessity saying innovate weapons. So I think it's not at all surprising that that this process, which you can see unfolding for thousands of years in various times and places and ways, might take off like with an industrial revolution and then the atomic age. Why wouldn't a civilization creating creature that has not yet controlled the war of all against all, why wouldn't they eventually see civilized societies whose weaponry had become so powerful that they could destroy the civilization itself? I don't know, how persuasive do you find that, that it wouldn't eventually happen? that there would be ever increasing power indefinitely. And therefore, eventually, whether it's in thousands of years or tens of thousands of years, if the power is growing continually and the war of all against all has not been brought under control, well, something like a nuclear holocaust, well, wouldn't that eventually happen? Would it be nuclear? Are there other ways in which ever escalating arms race besides the nuclear could lead to the ability of a civilization to destroy itself? I don't know. And similarly, it is foundational to the nature of civilization that it was built upon changing the relationship between human societies and the ecosystem. I mean, it was originally a different way of getting food, not what nature spontaneously provides. Bringing things under control. Plants get planted as a crop. Animals get herded as a herd that gives milk and meat or whatever. They control more and more, and that continues to escalate in this culture that's able to hand down increasing understanding of how to control the ecosystem with the increasing innovation that's inevitable when you got generation after generation of creative creatures, some of whom are going to come up with stuff that makes the society more capable of achieving its goals, more powerful in interacting with the ecosystem to get what it wants. Green revolution in our time is, one of those kind of breakthroughs. Genetic engineering right now of crops is another one of those. We got more and more control. And then there's the question of whether this increasing power is going to be utilized in a way which is consistent with the thriving of that civilization and with the rest of life on Earth. And so far, we have not done all that impressively on that score. So far, the civilization that we've built is threatening the survival of the civilization as we know it. And maybe life on Earth, I don't know how catastrophic it can be. I doubt it would be all of life. Something survives, and the evolutionary process would pick up whatever pieces were left. Some of those we might be part of those pieces, like in those dystopian movies, Mad Max and Blade Runner and all the rest. Or maybe we aren't, and maybe it takes a long time, millions of years possibly. To really repair what we would do to the planet. I don't know, but as a species have developed the power to destroy ourselves in two different ways, approximately destroy ourselves. In neither case do we have under control the force of destruction, and that's a whole shtick in itself. But if you look at, well, if we did have a nuclear holocaust, how would some cosmic historian explain how that happened? I would say that we could find a good way of explaining it as a function of what that force was that got unleashed. I do develop that idea on betterhumanstory.org. But in any event, the cosmic historian would be able to find that there are a lot of manifestations of brokenness that sort of played a role in getting us to the point where, say, what almost happened in 1962 between the United States and the Soviet Union over the Soviet missiles in Cuba actually takes place. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen over Ukraine. I hope it doesn't happen over Taiwan. But we're playing Russian roulette with that because we still have an anarchic international system. And then we've got the brokenness that accounts for how some of this is in the economic system. The brokenness that accounts for how we've developed as a civilization such that we fail to respond to what was known about the challenge that we faced. And, for over 30 years, we've really been in a position as a civilization that if we were not beset by a force of brokenness that operated through, say, the fossil fuel company and, say, through the Republican Party, if we were responsible in responding to it, instead of there being these destructive forces that somehow are very powerful in our society that have immobilized us from doing what the science was already telling us to do back at the Rio conference in 1992. So there, you can actually see how these things arise, and there's an analysis to be done about the force of brokenness and about the need to create an order in our civilization which is better able to protect us from destroying ourselves. One in which there wouldn't be an industry like the fossil fuel industry is willing to sacrifice the human future for its own short-term profits and has the power somehow to achieve that. And we wouldn't have a society in which there is really a danger that somebody bent upon predation and expansion at the expense of its neighbors, like in Ukraine or Taiwan, could just use its power because there's nothing to stop them, and that might generate a war that, well, who knows what the hell it would do. So civilization arises with a problem of a war of all against all, and weaponry will inevitably give us a civilization-creating species the ability to destroy itself with weapons, I'm suggesting. Civilization arises with the re-engineering of the ecosystem in order to empower people to get more of what they want out of the natural world than what hunter-gatherers were able to do. But there's nothing, the selection for power, which is part of my parable of the tribes, says, the short-term advantages of things which destructively exploit nature. And this goes back actually thousands of years if you look at the topsoil and the forests and all that stuff, and now at the climate, that we've not, that re-engineering the biosphere for our own advantage has long been a source of destructiveness of the human beings on this planet. But we've now become such a big ecological bull in the biospheric china shop that our destructiveness actually constitutes a major threat. So both of those point toward the challenge that we face as a civilization-creating species. And I'll talk more about that in the next video in this series, which is about the challenge that inevitably will face any creature that steps onto the path of civilization. Eventually, they're going to have to order their civilization well enough and soon enough to live in harmony in terms of warfare and in terms of their relationship with the rest of the system of life on their planet. Thanks. Take a look at systematic presentations of all this on abetterhumanstory.org. Thanks.